And this is an interview with Reverend John Thomas Porter for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is March 26, 1997. Reverend Porter, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit and talk with me today.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask you, first of all, were your parents originally from Birmingham?
No, they were both from Russell County, Pittsview, Alabama. You've probably never heard Pittsview, P-I-T-T-S.
Near Phoenix City?
Yes, yes. Pittsview, which was, Phoenix City is now the county seat.
Right.
They had another county seat during that time, but that is Russell County.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, were you born in Russell County or were you born here in Birmingham?
No, I was born in Birmingham, 8 blocks from where I pastored. I didn't get very far in life. 8 blocks.
8 blocks away. That's a long journey, a long 8 blocks.
Yeah, just a little roundabout, but I ended up 8 blocks away from home.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Siblings, how many brothers and sisters?
I had 1 brother, 1 sister, so it was 3 children, and they're all still living.
Okay, where did you fit in that? Were you the baby?
I was the youngest. I really preferred it. I was the youngest of the 3.
The youngest of the 3. And what neighborhood did you grow up in?
Titusville, and I'm one of the original blue bloods of Titusville.
Okay.
See, that were the original Titusville people, and then it grew, and you got Lincoln Park and some other segments of now Titusville.
Right.
But I was there among the first family, so
First family.
we are among the original blue bloods
Okay.
of Titusville.
Yes.
Yes.
What about the educational background of your parents?
My father, if he went to school at all, he didn't mention it.
Okay.
He never alluded to one day in school, which I'm not sure he ever went. I think he was a country boy and he did a lot of farming and stuff.
Yes.
So his educational background was nil.
Right.
My mother may have gone to about the 6th or 7th grade, and but we're from very proud families.
Right.
Ambitious, always striving to be better, etc. So they were totally unlettered. I doubt whether my father could read. He could write his name, but I think that's about all.
Were they grown when they came to Birmingham, or did they come as children?
No, they married in Pittsview. My father came to Birmingham as a young man of about 18 or 19 years old, and then he went back a year or so later and brought his sweetheart to Birmingham after having this big front porch wedding in Pittsview. So they moved here and located in the area where Southtown Project is now.
Right.
It was Scruggs Alley. So marvelous things can come out of the alley.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So their first 3-room house was in Scruggs Alley, and it was one of those kind of situations where the house was spotless,
right.
You know. And yet these are the kind of people who came out of the alleys, who moved to Titusville, which was sort of upscale.
That's right.
It was not even rich where the professionals were, but at that time, Titusville was really kind of moving up.
That's right.
Well, they moved from Scruggs Alley and they moved to Titusville. But interesting, I will just throw this in. My father was a yard man. They are landscape engineers now, but he was a yard man at a private home. And this was about 29. And to give you some of the attitude of the South, he went to the employer and asked for enough money to pay down on a car. The employer, who was a typical white bigot, would not allow him, give him money to buy a car, but he agreed to give him the down payment on a house. So in 29, this big went out to Titusville and bought the chauffeur house. He bought the butler house. And he bought the yard man house. And the agreement was they would pay for the house $5 a week.
From their wages.
From the wages. And my father was making $15 and he wondered, how can you take care of a family and pay me $5 a week? Yeah, that won't leave you but $10. And my father assured him he could make it. But the guy, gave my father a raise to $20. And
so retain that $15
15 plus
income.
percent of the house. Now this was the worst kind of bigot.
Now, where did he live in Birmingham? The person that he worked for was in Homewood.
On top of the mountain. He's one of the richest men in Birmingham. And all the very rich lived on top of the mountain overlooking Birmingham. Now, the very rich have moved further out now. But at that time, the very rich lived on the very top of the mountain. And all of these were domestics. They had 5 and 6 servants per house. You don't hardly find one there now.
Right.
Or maybe part-time twice a week.
Sure.
But every day, 5 servants worked in that house.
What kind of business was this person involved with? Do you know that?
Alabama Power.
Alabama
He was president of the Alabama Power Company, upon whose board I now work.
That is something.
Yes. But that was interesting how that kind of relationship where he was opposed to my father having a car, but interested in a house, which we were very blessed in a sort of indirect way.
Right.
But I've always appreciated him, even though he was a typical Southerner, that at that point he blessed us in a marvelous way.
Yes. Prior to your father coming, did his family own property in
Pittsfield? No.
Were they?
My father was from
They were farmers.
Sharecroppers, and because of a leg injury or whatever it caused my grandfather to limp. He could not straighten his leg was bent. So he could not farm because of that leg. So he was a keeper of cows. And the owner had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cows. And my grandfather would see after these cows. And twice a week, he would call those cows to the house. And to hear him call cows, and you look and you can't see a single cow anywhere, in 15 minutes, hundreds of cows.
The calling of the cow
would be coming. And I'm sure you get this kind of job because that's the only thing he did. He could not walk behind a plow. He was limping. So my father's beginnings were very simple. And
so you then visited your grandparents?
Yes, in the summertime, we would stay 6 weeks, maybe every year, in the country with our grandparents. And both my grandparents were in Pittsfield.
Right.
Yeah.
Did your mother work outside of the home?
My mother would work occasionally as the upstairs maid.
In the same home?
In the same home with the Martins.
Okay. Well, did she always live at home or did she at times stay there with that family?
No, she lived at home. My father would stay on the place every now and then when they would vacation. They always wanted someone, and the servants would rotate terms of staying on the property at night. So that was, but my mother did work just on occasions when Mrs. Martin wanted something very special done, and she was sort of considered the upstairs maid.
What was Titusville like in those early days that you were growing up, you went to Washington Elementary School.
Right.
Tell me about Washington Elementary School and how that fitted into that community.
It was a black community beyond the railroad tracks. Black communities are always beyond the railroad tracks, you see. And going west, you would catch the streetcar here and ride to what is now UAB. And that was called Idlewild Circle. And you would get off the streetcar at the end of the line and walk due west. And once you cross the railroad tracks, you were then in the black community and in the in Tennessee. There were very few, if any, paved streets in Birmingham. They were all dirt. And we would sweep like you would sweep a house. There was no grass because we had hogs and chickens and stuff, so there was no grass. And we had to once a week sweep it like you do a house. I didn't live to see all of the streets paved, but as a child, they were not paved.
You know, I always thought about that. What did that represent? The sweeping of the streets, the sweeping of the yards. What did that represent in the black family, black community?
Well, now in the white community, you would cut the grass, and it looks fresh and clean, orderly. Okay. Well, to get that same effect of orderliness and cleanliness, you would sweep it. And you get the same effect as when you just cut the grass. All the dirt is laying level. So it was cleanliness. And houses were clean inside and outside. And because next day, the chickens and walking over it would kind of crumple up the dirt. So you go back and sweep it again, and they gave it a very nice, smooth, clean look.
What do you remember about your days at Washington Elementary School?
They were good days. All of my growing up days were happy days. I think I'm a very happy adult because my childhood days were very, very comfortable and they were very good. My time at Washington School was a very special time. We always felt very protected. The neighborhood was protected because the adults watched out of their windows. Somebody was always looking. And so it was a very safe environment, and you was very much at home. And at Washington School, you had teachers who were sort of like mothers. They were not cold and withdrawn. They was involved with you and everything. So it was a very, very good time. We had many families that were not well off, and they weren't well off. A coal miner made them better salaries. The only problem is the labor union had them on strike 6 months out of the year. But when they were working, they were making the better salaries. Domestics never did make good salaries, but they always worked. So if you didn't have a little income, you had some.
Right.
So you find a domestic person almost as well off or better than a railroad worker who drew just a half year salary.
Right. Now, you had railroad workers, you had coal miners, you had domestics. What other occupations did you remember growing up in your community?
They were all homeowners on our street, interestingly. On the street I lived in the neighborhood, everybody were homeowners. There were some postal workers. And I'm sure common laborers, but we were fortunate in the neighborhood to have the postal workers, the coal miners, or the railroad people, and domestics from the big homes. See, that was a class there. If you were domestics at the smaller home or the lesser rich white people, then those who were in the homes of the very rich, there was a very striking difference. Our church to which we both belong, had black folk from the very rich families. So it was always kind of special.
Okay, so this this aura of Sixth Avenue is not something new.
No.
Okay, that's very interesting.
We do have doctors and nursing down then. Now, we had no doctors or nurses, but they were all at another kind of level.
Right.
Even among the domestics, it was the higher paid or domestics from the larger family that attended our church.
Right.
And it was, what do you look at it? Yes.
Reporter, after Washington Elementary School, then you went on to some other little school?
No, Oman.
Oh, you went to Oman?
Oman High, yes. You see, there was only one high school that was Parker.
Okay.
But Oman, which had been white, had now become black. But it was only a 2-year high school. And so everybody on the south side would go to Oman for 2 years. And for the last 2 years of high school, everybody from everywhere would come to Parker.
Mm-hmm. And you said Ullman had been a white school.
Yes.
Had it been a white junior high school, elementary school, or do you remember?
I don't know. I really don't know. I know it was a white school.
Right.
But then it became a black 2-year high school.
Right. And then you went from Ullman to Parker.
Right.
And what was that like?
It was just not a new world, but there were more people from everywhere. And some you never did get to know. 30 years later, I went to a class reunion, and my wife said to me, look like you all didn't know each other. I said, well, we don't know each other now. And frankly, we didn't know each other then. It was too many. It was probably the largest high school in the world. There were 5,000 students, which made it the largest black high school in the world.
That's where it has been termed the largest Negro high school in the world.
In the world. I don't know how that was so with that. But anyway, I was drawn into that, and soon I became more aggressive and assertive in high school than in elementary school. I was always shy and sort of withdrawn, but in high school, the shyness shut down, and I started getting aggressive politically and other things.
What extracurricular activities were you involved in?
I was never into band or football, believe it or not, but I just knew I played football. No. I was always on the student council. I was a leader of that.
You was a political leader.
Political leader.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Until the principal called me one day in office, my senior year, and he told me that he didn't like my militant attitude. I never heard of the word militant. And I've been trying so hard to impress the principal, who was new.
Was that Johnson?
Johnson. Told me he didn't like my militant attitude.
And what was he referring to? How did you interpret?
I was a member of the High Y, remember the choir. The High Y was the kind of thing I was involved in. And that was a protest or a boycott against the teacher who was over the High Y. And I was sort of accused of leading.
Was it an unfounded accusation?
We didn't think so. I don't even remember what it was now. But we decided we were going to protest and boycott. And I think the faculty member had gone to the principal and told him that we had, pulled a strike. And he called me and he was angry, told me, I don't like your militant attitude. Ooh, that hurt my heart, because I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, I entered the oratorical contest and the choir, and all of this was part of, far removed from the, John Porter of elementary school.
Well, now, you being a young black male growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, been rather aggressive at the time, and you seemingly had some vision of where you wanted to go. How did this period of living in Birmingham impact upon your life as the way that you would view your future and view your world?
As I indicated earlier, my childhood was a happy childhood in that we were provided for and was never in dire need, never had a surplus, but most was so. And my father always told me how to approach white people, never with my hat on, always say yes, sir. And this is how things are. You know, with a kind of acceptance, I was not fighting against this at any point because I wasn't angry about it. You know, I thought it was just a part of course. So as I grew older, I felt more and more unfairness. I was sensitive to the segregation of the buses. The thing that really brought it into focus, and when I started working my senior year in high school, everybody on the job was Mr. and Mrs., even the young kids. But I was always John to everybody. Nobody explained to me why, but I just knew this was not right. And what I would do my junior, senior year in high school, I developed my own private protest against these inequities that nobody knew about. Like I made up my mind, I would never say yes, sir, to a white man. And he would come in and says, John, bet you should have booked that was on my desk. And I would say, well, let me see. I think I saw it over, always avoiding saying yes, sir.
And this was conscious.
Yes. Oh, I knew that it was wrong for everybody, even the folk my age, to be Mr. and Mrs. and I was first name. So I decided what I would do. I just wouldn't ever say yes, sir to nobody. You know, and interestingly, I found out years later that the man who was my boss knew exactly what I was doing.
Is that right?
And didn't fire me. I can always love it because he didn't fire me, but I made a conscious effort never to say yes, sir, to a white man. My second thing I did, this is my junior, senior year in high school. I was nominated for something, and I don't want to lose my thought, but oh yes, in Birmingham, I decided my own mind, never told my dad or anybody, that I would never allow a white man to outwalk me on the streets of Birmingham. And I would stand at the red light, and as soon as the light would turn green, I would step off like I was going 100 miles an hour. And I never allow any white person to walk faster than me. And this was my private protest that I never uttered to anybody but did.
Yeah, I'm reading this book now, and I'm gonna let you read once I'm finished with it. And it talks about those kinds of protests that were unorganized protests, but nevertheless very, very real.
Yes, because I'm sure that every white man I walked past knew what I was doing. Because you just didn't do that. I mean, how fast you were walking, you never walked ahead of anybody. But it just deep within my soul, without ever saying it to anybody, I would never allow it I walk.
Right. You being the younger of the children, what was the relationship? What kind of relationship did you have with your brothers and sisters?
A good relationship as childhood relationships go. But my brother didn't go to college, my sister didn't go to college. And once I went to college, it sort of set me over in another league. Now, we have good rapport now and everything, but from the time I went to college, I sort of began to live in another world.
How do you mean?
my interest was not their interest was not my interest. It just sort of gave us,
Would you say that you were growing away from them?
separated only out of interest.
Okay.
You know, but still a closeness, and we were the kind of family, it was a small family, yet kind of large, that we were still family. I never sensed for a moment that my brother was envious of me. And the reason why I know that is my brother was a heavy drinker in those days. And I would come home on weekends, and he would want me to go to the club with him. Well, I didn't want to go to clubs. You know, that was his thing. But I would go. And he would always introduce me, hey, I want you to meet my college brother.
Yeah.
And, you know,
He was proud of.
yes, even though he was intoxicated, he expressed pride, which I said, it must have been genuine and real, because he did it for so long. He wanted to present me to everybody and always did it by letting them know this is my college brother.
How much older was he?
2-3 years at the most, pretty much the same age.
What was your transition like then from high school to college? You went off to Alabama State, is that correct?
Yes.
And what was that transition like?
When I first graduated, our father was quite poor, couldn't go to college. So I graduated in January. We had 2 classes graduating every year, but not 2, we had like 8 to 10 classes. And you either graduated in May or in December. So I didn't graduate. I did graduate in January on time. I was the youngest in the class. But in May, I couldn't go off because I was summer school, etc. And they couldn't go the next year because I really hadn't planned to go that early. So I got a job working. And the thing that really turned me around, got me going. First of all, I'd chosen friends to run with who were all college-bound kids from families more affluent than mine. So when I woke up and saw them going to college, I really, you know, and I think by being the right people who was college-bound, it wasn't counselors, because it was my peers, the very people I was running with. I looked up and they were on their way to college, so I just grabbed my stuff and started running too. So I was inspired more by my peers than I was by faculty members, you know, who really didn't say much to me about college.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did you decide on Alabama State?
It was cheap. Yes. I wanted to go to Talladega, but people who went to Talladega was the doctors, daughters and sons of doctors and lawyers. And so I wanted to go to, it was cheaper, so I went to Alabama State.
Tell me about your experience at Alabama State. What, you mentioned earlier that as when you arrived at, in high school at Parker, that you had to become more assertive. So by the time you get to college now, you did not go the first year.
Right.
So now you have a little more maturity. So what was that experience like?
I think being more mature made me ready to be more of a leader. Because deep down, in spite of my shyness and withdrawnness, I wanted to be a leader, you know. And he prayed to be a leader. And the Lord did, in fact, my junior year, made me president of the junior class, which is just great. Then my senior year, and I was always president. I was president of this and president of that. I was always president. But the height of my ambition was to be president of Alpha. And when my senior year came up, I was elected president of Alpha. And interestingly, I took office about 3 months into the term. I became ill. And the doctor said I had tuberculosis or cancer. And I was at the peak of the biggest man on campus. I thought the doctor was old, didn't know what he was saying, and I told him I was going home for a week or 3 days for tests, and I'll be back, and don't make any announcement till I return. Well, I went to the Birmingham, came to the doctor, and they confirmed they told me TB or scrofula, I think they said. But anyway, it's a tuberculosis of the lymphatic glands. I may be wrong because I've never seen that doctor since, but anyway, I was out about 2 years, But being there my senior year caused me to be mature. I was when I was out a year and then came back, I was even more of a leader, and I was more of a counselor. Younger guys would come and sit in my room. And
they probably had heard of you then. Right.
Yes, and pretty soon after I got that, they heard about it. Because it was rare to have a young person preaching. He either lost his mind, had a nervous breakdown or something. And so,
when was it that you went into the ministry?
my senior year,
Senior year.
after the Lord knocked me down and laid me out, I had a real talk with him. I prayed. And we talked before. But I had a real in-depth conversation with him. And that's when I made certain promises to him. And,
well, when you returned then for your senior year, you then had an experience to meet an individual that would have an impact upon the entire country and the world.
yeah, my senior year, I was a ministerial student. Only one on campus. So most of them had never heard of it about my age, talking about preaching. See? So when I returned prior to my senior year, started my senior year, then I was asked by a faculty member if I'd heard of Martin King. I told him no, I hadn't. He says, Martin King is the new pastor of Dexter Avenue Church, and you ought to hear it. Okay. So, upon his recommendation, a couple of weeks later, I went down with some friends to hear Dr. King speak. And when the service was over, I think it was the next week on campus, the professor introduced me to Martin King as a young preacher. And Martin King says, I don't have anybody at Dexter working with me. Why don't you come down to Dexter and work with me? And I had heard him speak. I'd never heard anybody speak like that before. And his image of a preacher was just so perfect for me. He didn't dress too flashy. It was just perfect. So I knew it was my opportunity to go. So he invited me and I went down there. For a year, I sat next to Martin King during his first year as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Church. And I think his greatest preaching took place during that period. That he was never really, otherwise he was running from post to post, never had time to write or rewrite, So, but as a pastor, he was always in the pulpit, and only on a very rare occasion he would miss. But I got opportunities to get to know him and to work with him and see him. I consider at his best.
Were you very close friends? And did you become very close friends as a result of that year?
I would not say close friends. I like the word close friend because he was a person who you could say he was your friend, but that was no buddy relationship. You see, sometimes you say close friends, you think of a buddy or something like that. Now, to me, he was never that. I never called him Martin. It was probably 3 years different in our ages, but from day one, I always called him Dr. King. Dr. King. Yeah. If I look like a tyrant, I'm really not. Just my diabetes working on me at this.
We will just do this tape.
Okay.
And we'll cut it off then if later on we may need to get back.
Yeah, okay, I'm excited about it here.
Well, we still have another, this is a 90-minute text, so we have about 40 minutes.
Okay, so let's come just a few minutes, I don't want to look too tired.
Yeah.
I'm just to relax.
Reverend Porter, you did have the privilege of working with Dr. King.
Yes,
How did that impact upon your relationship, impact upon how you would eventually view the ministry?
well, I worked with him a year after being invited down to it was his first year out of Boston, and he was just a local parish priest, you know, hoping to do a good job as pastor. And it was my senior year at Alabama State. He was a tremendous preacher, and I'm sure he did his best preaching during that first year. After that, he went into orbit, and but he was a marvelous preacher. He was a new kind of preacher. You know, the preachers I had known prior to King were not lettered preachers. They had no formal training. And King dress, everything was different. It was a new image of the preacher, and I needed that badly. You know, just starting out of the ministry, I needed a new image very badly. So he came into my life at a special time that I needed another role model of a preacher, and he was that. And in watching him, and I just want to allude to the fact that he would write his sermons complete, be typed up. And at the time of the delivery of the sermon, he would leave the folder in the chair and go to the pulpit, and you could almost pick up the written sermon and read it with him. He had obviously almost a photographic mind, but he never carried the manuscript to the pulpit. Now, I tried that a couple of times, but it didn't work. So, I had my manuscript, the whole thing. Well, he would leave the manuscript in the chair and he'd go up. He would go back to Boston every now and then to complete up his work on the PhD. And during those absences, he would allow me to preach in his stead, etc. So, but I'm not sure if there was ever any, I'm sure there were, but just widespread folk who say I was a good friend of King. He was the kind of guy who didn't have a whole lot of friends. He had a lot of people who knew him and he knew them. But just to say, I'm a friend to King. No, he was a serious kind of person. But he didn't tell jokes, was he did that? No, he didn't. You know, he was just so serious about everything.
Always serious.
Yes, that you really didn't get no joking and clowning out of it. You know, he was always very about what he was about. And never on time. And that's one thing I did learn here. I have to be on time. It has to do with now, he was starting to be 30 minutes late, just like he was on time. And I realized later, I said, if he had stayed on time all the years of his life, he would have died much earlier. But by letting start buying he was, his technique was easy to follow. He had many things that I picked up, I still do today. But then I went to Atlanta after graduating, went to work with his father for 3 years, and was able to see another kind of pastor and see another guy pastoring and decide as to what you would do and what you would not do.
How were they singing or how were they different?
They're very different. Very different. Monsignor was the most unique man I ever met. Not Junior. It was Senior who had a uniqueness that no one else that I mean was like. He was a old-fashioned dictator. He was a combination of things that I won't go into now. He was a combination of attitudes and spirits and dispositions. Some I liked, some I didn't like. You know, but he was a very strong father. Very domineering. Everybody had to be under his wing. But I was able to see the pastor in the wild. Like I worked with Father 3 years, so they gave me longer to see a pastor work. But it was King Senior who has probably influenced my life at another level more than King Junior.
Now, were you working with him while you were at Morehouse?
Yes, I did all my intern work. I was janitor of the church. I was a pulpit assistant. I was sort of getting close to his daughter, to Maud's sister and the king's daughter, and I worked in every capacity you can think of at Ebenezer Church.
And you were there for 3 years.
Yes.
And after you finished up at Morehouse, what did you do?
The week before I graduated, I was called to a church in Detroit, which was shocking. I was ready to go to those small country church in Georgia, down home, Alabama. But 1 week before graduation, I got this telegram saying I'd been called to the First Baptist Church of Hamtramck, Michigan, which is in the heart of Detroit. And I went and stayed 4.5 years, had a marvelous and glorious time with them for 4.5 years.
Well, how was that transition? Now you are a Southern young man coming from Alabama and Georgia, going to Detroit. And I know that many of the people in Detroit, of course, were from Alabama and the South. What was that experience like?
I look back on it, it was a very, very good experience. I don't say I could pastor Detroit, now it's awesome up there now. But it was a good one. It was an excellent church with about 1,000 members, just the right size for a person who had never pastored a church before. And it was a good ministry in that I was wondering, the Lord, why would you send me to Detroit? I want the folk in the South. If I have anything to offer at all, I want to go to Alabama, Georgia. Why Michigan? And one day the answer came to me. I was driving down the streets of Hamtramck and almost had an accident with a white lady in another car. And I put on brakes and backed up and went on my way. This lady caught up with me, rolled down her window and says, "Get over, nigger." Then I realized I was up there getting ready to come south. Because if I could be called a nigger in Michigan, I can sure take any nigger in Alabama to get that put over, you see.
Some would call Detroit any of the northern cities up south.
Yes. Yeah. So I consider it as a training time because soon thereafter, the call came to come back to Birmingham. So I think.
Now that experience, what is that experience like when you have spent now 4 years in Detroit, and then finally you get a call to come back to Birmingham, to a rather prominent church?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, I as a young man in the ministry, I hope one day the senior pastor would invite me back to be his associate. It's the church I grew up in, 6th Avenue. It's the church I grew up in and loved dearly. And my highest hope was to be an associate minister to the pastor of the church. And he became ill and died. And the church I loved so much invited me. I don't think I was really ready to come until the day I gave up coming. Sometimes sons of churches can become so obsessed with the idea of becoming one day the pastor of the church that sort of disqualifies them. But I knew the church had a choice to invite me as pastor or 2 or 3 other candidates they were looking at. So it was a time of soul searching. And I remember saying to myself, if they never call me, I would still love the church like I always loved it. I think the moment I came to the conclusion that I was going to love them anyway as my church, I was ready to come. Until then, I wasn't ready. So I was overwhelmed and proud that the folk who I grew up with, who taught me as a child, would invite me to be back to be the head papa of them all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Your installation service, Martin Luther King preached the sermon.
A knock at midnight.
Knock at midnight.
At midnight. By this time, he was in orbit. See, we had met back in 55, 54, in September, maybe 54. And this was many years later that we finally had to go to jail together. And that was the only time the King was jailed, found guilty. We had broken a court injunction in March. And they carried that court all the case, all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent it back overturned or something. But no, I'm not what they did. They wouldn't hear it, which meant that they accepted the ruling of the lower court that he had to serve 5 days. So we're together, all the folk. I was a part of the injunction at the March, and we had to go to jail. You see, so that's the only time he was ever convicted.
Tell me though about what do you remember about that Sunday that you preached at your church, at your installation service?
Well, being installed as pastor of the largest church in the state, and I was still quite young. I think I was 31 or 32 years old. I was I was really overwhelmed. You know, I think of the day as being just all of the arrangements and everything happened to be in place. I was very finicky in those days, and we had to process right on time. Everybody had to know where they were going. So I was just overwhelmed by the day. I thought I would die. It was just that exciting, you know. And to have him agreeing to come, and he was a worldwide figure almost by that time, you see. And so it was a very, very special day. Yeah.
So as a result of that relationship, in '63, when SCLC came to town to demonstrate, you were called on by Dr. King.
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk about that experience?
Well, I had come just 6 months prior to the big break. The demonstrations broke out in Birmingham, maybe 6 months. And my respect for Dr. King was of such that I would have done anything, any assignment he would have given me, I would have done without question. But it just so happened that his assignment was to lead the march, to go to jail. Now, yeah, I think I don't want to get mixed up there. Now, the question was concerning the period
when he initially called you.
to come
about
about
coming to Birmingham, right?
Yes. Well, his brother AD was very active in our communication, so all the time the communication was not directly with him. It was sometimes through his brother, who was right there with him every day and night. And he indicated to his brother that he wanted me, Nelson Smith, and himself, that's Martin King's brother, to lead the march, I believe, on Palm Sunday.
Right.
And we agreed. Nelson Smith was not a great jail goer, but because AD, who was always a provocative person, had suggested we would go together and we would call ourselves the Three Horses of the Apocalypse. Now, what that meant was nothing. We didn't know what it meant. It was just a high-sounding word. Three Horses of the Apocalypse. And we were together after church at St. Paul, the St. Paul Church. And then after we would pray in a little sermon of prayer, then we would go out and march. And our church has always gotten out before other churches. So I was there a long time waiting for my colleagues to show up. I was getting a bit nervous at the AD, and Nelson wouldn't show up, you know what I'm saying? I would be out there by myself. So, finally they did show up, and they began to sing the songs and pray. You know, people praying, some people were shouting, and I believe I heard my mother's, you know, out there crying. And but it was, you can't even convey the spirituality of those moments. You know, they were very emotional moments. Because all you can do is maybe see the person, you know, we don't have some, we have lost of life, anything. But anyway, out of a large crowd, maybe 1,200 people, we were able to get about 40 people to volunteer to go. And we all went out on the sidewalk and lined up. Because all the marchers were on the sidewalk. You would think of them maybe in the middle of the street blocking traffic. No, every march that was ever taken was done from the sidewalk. But once we got lined up on the sidewalk to walk, I looked through the crowd, and that was my daddy. I said, oh Lord. Then my daddy started toward me. I said, not now, Daddy, not now. Because he told me over and over again, you leave this thing alone, you know, and he was afraid I would get hurt, you see. So he told me, leave it alone, leave this thing alone, segregation, you see. So there at the moment of my big moment of march, to hear my daddy come, you see. He got close as he could to me, reached through the crowd and shook hands with me. I could have walked all the way to my government by that time.
That's all you needed.
So I needed to shook hands with me and went back. So before long, we were in jail.
Tell me about that experience, just the arrest itself. How did that take place?
Well, it was an agreed upon thing. In other words, they knew what route you would take. And they were all times designated where they would pick you up. You see. And they were smart. I remember it was one of the later marches that out of 1,000 people, you could only get 40 to volunteer to march. Out of the people left in the church, 1,000, you have 900 people more left in the church. But once we came out and get lined up to march and marched off, then all 90 would come and follow us. In other words, they consider themselves not involved, but just friends. So
You then, when the three of you were approached.
Okay, we got to the police, and as we approached the police, the guy had a bullhorn, and he says, this march can go no further. You either disband or you're under arrest. He gave us a choice to walk away or be arrested. At that point, I remember AD saying, pray Poland. Well, we dropped to our knees, you know. After he said you're on arrest, more or less, we didn't kneel then. That's when AD said to me, pray Poland. And I started praying on camera. But once the prayer's over, then we stood up, and the police would escort us to the paddy wagon.
Was it AD or was it Reverend Smith that said pray for it?
AD.
AD.
AD was always the instigator. He had everybody doing whatever he thought they ought to be doing. So they paraded us. They would never let you walk by yourself. They would always catch you by the arm and pull you. But there was no prostrating on the floor and having the police drag you. King would not allow that. King had us to understand you're breaking the law. When the man said you're under arrest, you must go peacefully and quietly to the paddy wagon. So
Did they, in the paddy wagon that you were placed in, were there other people other than the three of you?
There may have been one or two others. It was very small and tight back there. And so you couldn't fit in, but so many in the back of the paddy wagon. But I remember on our way to jail, we were being thrown from one side of the paddy wagon to another. If the guy was very upset, who was driving, we were singing, we shall overcome. And he was, more we would sing, the more the city would come. The more we saw he was upset, the more we would sing. See? By the time we got to the city hall, to the jailhouse, he would go around and open the door. I remember he opened the door, and there was this big chorus, "We shall overcome." And he pulled his billy club and said to y'all, "You better cut out that singing or else." Well, in order to come out of the paddy wagon, you had to kind of dip your head and come out. Nelson Smith thought about that thing a while, because in the back, AD was saying, "Sing, sing." But the driver was saying, "Stop singing." And AD was saying, "Sing." So Nelson Smith, knowing his head would come out the paddy wagon first, he told AD, "You better stop that GD singing." Because my head would go out first. AD always in the background about sing, sing, So he was the instigator. He made things happen.
How long were you in jail?
We were in jail maybe, I was in jail longer than AD, because AD and Nelson started right away to get their deacons to come and get them out. And all my feeling was, in that we led the folk into the jail, we ought to stay in jail with them. But AD insisted that he could be, AD and Abram and Nelson Smith said they could be more effective outside. So it wasn't long before deacons were there to take them out. They'd been there about 6 hours, 7 hours. And I was the only one left, and was able to stay with the people. And at some point, I did get out.
Did you stay overnight?
Yes. Yes.
During this particular time, the movement, of course, was at its height. But there was seemingly was some difficulties after about a month of marching that it lost some of its steam.
Yes.
And then there seemingly was the need to discuss how to reinvigorate the movement.
Well, it's hard to keep excitement going. And the people who had gone to jail had been once and some twice. And you needed more people to go to jail. There was some guy, I remember very good, the guy saying to me, "Reverend, I can't march today. I got to work today." So, thank God for that. At least he was ready to go to his job on the day assigned. And even though they had these huge, he had to go. So this guy said he couldn't go because he had to work. So you really had people. Oh yes, I'm back at the point that they were running out of people to go back again. So they went out to Miles College to get college kids. But I gather that since Miles may have been having a corporate fund drive, which sending students out would thoroughly, jeopardize their well-being. So they couldn't get any miles to, so I think that on their way back, not have with their hands empty with miles students, somebody came up with a bright idea. Let's go back to high school. But I admit that was not any long-range planning of, that we know a month from now. We did so many things that, I know that was the miracle of the movement, is that there was no grand plan. It just happened. The time was right and it happened. But but ask me another question.
So the children then were brought into the.
Yes, children were brought in. Yes. Yes.
This sort of reinvigorates.
Oh, that really shut it off. But I remember vaguely, just prior to that, and that was a real eye-opener for me, a growth time for me. King came in and says, "The press is meeting. Let's get something going." Well, that was the first time that I realized that God was not leading the movement. I thought up to this point, we depending on God. But I found out it was the newspapers too. We needed God and the newspaper.
That's right.
He told us to get something going, the press was leaving, so that was, I grew a little
Right.
to understand you do need that.
Yes. You know, some have said that Bull Connor played a very prominent role, and the movement owes him as much credit as any other single individual for the success of the movement because of his tactics. How do you feel about
I don't like that, I don't like the old Bull Connie. No, I don't like the old, I think that the time was right. I don't think anybody made it happen. I think if the climate in the South was of such that the South was totally opposed to it, it would have never happened. The time was right. You needed a Martin King, you needed a Fred Shuttlesworth, you needed a Bull Connor. And they constituted the time. The time was right, you know. And
in September of '63, of course,
mhm.
we had the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And of course, that was the sister church, I assume,
Yes.
of 6th Avenue. How did that impact upon your congregation?
It was Sunday morning when the bomb went off, and we had just started our services, and somebody came in and told me that 16th Street had been bombed. Well, my first reaction was that we would be next. We had done more to provoke this than 16th Street. And they asked me, it had been, oh yeah, I was expecting them to throw a bomb.
Mm.
You know, I didn't think it would be a bomb being placed.
Right.
All thing I thought about was somebody driving by throwing a bomb. And so I said to them, you know, thinking at any moment it would happen, that we kind of brought everything to closure, the songs, where the prayer was, and asked people to be dismissed as quickly as possible. So, had everybody to leave the church. But then I went on to the emergency room from the church. That's where I remember Chris McNair in the emergency room. They had carried his daughter there.
Well, I want to just jump for a minute to the incident that took place here in Birmingham. The three of you, A.D. King, Nelson Smith, and yourself, of course, history records that you led the march on Palm Sunday. There is a monument in the park that was erected supposedly as a result of that, but the statues does not depict the three of you.
The picture was found in the archives. It was among the pictures, you know, in the planning of the park. It was the mayor, I assume, who wanted that picture, the picture of myself, AD, to be put in granite or in stone. And the picture was sent off to the sculptor in order to do it. And pictures of AD were sent to it, and pictures of Nelson Smith and myself were sent to Washington to the sculptor. I was in Washington at that same time. I went and sat in his studio for the statue, and the statue was complete. He had really done a mob and everything, the whole body. So he do it complete. It started off about that size, and when they finish it, it's in the complete form of the statue. So I sat for it. Okay. About 6 weeks later, or just prior to the time when the statue was to be delivered, I got a big box, in the mail. And I opened the box, and my head from the statue was in the box.
Did you have any prior warning?
No. No inkling whatsoever. You know, I'm kind of proud of the fact that, can you imagine something in stone, you know?
Well, what did you think when you saw this? Did you think this was just a duplicate and they were sending it to you?
I really didn't know until I read the letter. She had a note in there. So immediately I opened the note. And the note said to me that he regretted very much, but he had been ordered to cut the heads off the statue and put generic heads on. And he could have just thrown it away. But then I sat for him, we had talked, he got to know me a little bit. He spent time to put in the box and he said, somebody said, I've been instructed to cut these heads off. So,
Did he tell you who the instructions were?
yeah, I knew, no, he didn't. But I knew that to have that done, it had to come from the very top. So I knew it had to be Fred or the mayor who would give that kind of instructions, and I figured the mayor. So sure enough, about 1 week before the statue was to arrive, the mayor called me and asked me if he could come out to see me. Well, I knew exactly what he wanted now to tell me. So I told him no. I said, let me come down to your office. It's much busier than I am, so let me come to your office. So I went down, and he said to me that Abraham Woods and Fred Shuttlesworth had threatened him that if he did not cut the heads off the statues, that they would both resign from the museum and boycott the building. That was his threat. I didn't hear, this was the man, I haven't repeated in public to very many people, but the man said to me, that's why he ordered the heads to be removed, in that he was threatened by those two. And in order to please them, I suppose, he agreed to cut the heads off.
What was the rationale? What was their rationale for?
Well, one of the rationale was that it shouldn't be one person, it was a group of ministers, and that was just symbolic, etc. I'm always, I was wondering about that when I see Shuttlesworth's huge statue out front, and with him that was all right. But with us, rather than having heads that folk could recognize, just put some kind of anybody's head on there. And, otherwise, I'm going to quit. You see, and so when the mayor told me, I said, "Well, Mayor, you don't have to ever worry about me." Because I was flattered to think of the idea of having to be sculptured. So I appreciate that, and you'll never hear from me again on it. But that is how far away. And the rationale was that it was not just us, it was man, we were symbolic. And
would you accept that as being valid?
I think, yes, there was some validity. I would not like to question motives. It would seem to me that rather extreme, considering one's love for this institution and love for all the things that are about, that you would, for such a minor thing, leave the institution and boycott. That was not just leave the institution, it was a boycott.
But would you look at that act as being rather apolitical? I'm sorry, not apolitical, but ahistorical and political?
I think it was political. I was more puzzled by the fact that the mayor was pushed into this dilemma when he has made it clear he was not afraid of the FBI, he was not afraid of the IRA, and yet somehow he was saying that I'm scared of Abraham. I I don't know anybody else who's scared of Abraham. But I would rather accept it on his face value, because I'm still supportive of the mayor, and he's my man and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But he said they threatened him, and so with a threat, he cut both heads off the statue. And
Well, Reverend Porter, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and sit and talk with me today. And you've been very frank.
well, blessings. And once again, I was here for the camera. My diabetes is out of control today.
But you did a very good job.
But I'm glad to get on tape, and I hope that these words can make future generations understand the times.
Thank you very much.